Good morning. I'm Pastor Susie Hutchison, and today we have the opportunity to share in stories about God's propensity to turn what little we have to offer into abundance. We often think that there is not enough to go around, but God sees with different eyes. We'll hear from Hannah Kapler, Ron and Pam Fair, as well as myself. But first, let's hear from the gospel writer Luke. This is from chapter 9, verses 10 through 17. When the apostles returned, they described for Jesus what they had done. Taking them with him, Jesus withdrew privately to a city called Bethsaida. When the crowds figured it out, they followed him. He welcomed them, spoke to them about God's kingdom, and healed those who were sick. When the day was almost over, the 12 came to him and said, "Send the crowd away so that they can go to the nearby villages and countrysides and find lodging and food, because we are in a deserted place." He replied, "You give them something to eat." But they said, "We have no more than 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, unless we go and buy food for all these people." And they said this because about 5,000 men were present. Jesus said to his disciples, "Seat them in groups of about 50. They did so, and everyone was seated. He took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, looked up to heaven, blessed them, and broke them, and gave them to the disciples to set before the crowd. Everyone ate until they were full, and the disciples filled 12 baskets with the leftovers. I'm going to invite Hannah up to speak first.
Good morning. It is great to be here with you all today. For those of you who don't know me, you might know my grandparents, Wes and Margie, who have been longtime members here, or my dad, Chris, who grew up in this church. And Plymouth Church has been a church that I have been able to visit throughout the years as my family has been back in the States. I grew up as a missionary kid. My parents were missionaries. I went overseas when I was 4 years old, and I spent most of my childhood in South Korea and Central Asia. And if you hear that, you might think that I always wanted to be a missionary. But the truth is I actually didn't. But here I am. If you might hear the phrase, "Don't ever tell God you'll never do something." And I said I never wanted to be a missionary, and here I am. But the really interesting thing is, I think, my story of becoming a missionary shows how God can turn scarcity into abundance. So I never wanted to be a missionary. I thought I would come back to the States, go to college, and then just live in the States. But God arranged things so that I ended up going on a few short-term missions trips. And each time I went, I said, "Okay, God, I'll do this, and then I'll come back to the States." And every time something else happened, and I ended up going on another missions trip. And it was on one of those trips that God was really working in my heart, and it was about the space of a week. I was wrestling with God and saying I didn't want to be a missionary. I wanted to kind of come back to the States. There were a lot of things about missionary life that I knew was hard from growing up. But in that, I really felt God telling me to give that to him. And so I gave that scarcity of not wanting to be a missionary, wanting to come back to the States, to him. And I'm just surprised every time I think about it of how God took what I gave him and really multiplied it. I didn't have enough faith to become a missionary, but I had enough faith to take one step in obedience to him. And I think sometimes we think of scarcity as the impossibility to have abundance, but the truth is without God, anything that you have is scarcity. No matter how much you have, no matter how many resources, how much time, whatever it is, without God, anything is scarcity. But with him, no matter what you have, if you give it to him, he multiplies it into abundance. And trusting God, he's multiplied the things in my life into abundance. And I think if we step out in obedience and faith to Christ, he will multiply whatever you have in your life. And the incredible power of God's abundance is its effect on others. And so as a missionary, I just want to tell you a few places that I've been able to go. With OMS, I serve as a regional missionary, which means that I don't focus just on one country, but the work that I do is kind of across the Asia-Pacific region. If you see, there's an orange pin right around where Plymouth is, and then the green pins are some places that I've been able to visit and live. South Korea is where I currently live, and that is a picture of some Korean missionaries who are wanting to go overseas to places and share God's word. So in a very practical way, me being a missionary is multiplying the number of missionaries across the world. And then the photo of in Taiwan, I also lived there for a short amount of time. And I was able to build friendships with non-believers and invite them over to my house. And in that way, God is sowing seeds all over the world and bringing abundance. And I trust that those friends are not believers yet, but I trust that the seeds that God has planted in their lives can grow. Now, the third picture of the young girls in Hong Kong, that is a group of girls who I might not be able to see again, because I don't know if you are aware of the situation in Hong Kong, but a lot of Christian workers have had to leave. But I met them while we were having a short conference for high schoolers. It was a leadership conference, and they were actually asking really tough questions about eternity. This was during the time the protests were happening, and the time that I was able to have with them and kind of talking through the Bible and answering their tough questions is still having an effect, and I am able to keep in touch with them through social media and stuff, even though we can't see each other. And then that final picture in Malaysia, that is also a group of young girls. They came together for a retreat, and a lot of them are homeschooled girls, but they are living in a country that is a Muslim country. And they are trying to live according to what God says in the Bible and kind of asking the questions of how is the Bible still relevant to their lives. So the final story I want to tell you is the story of a young lady named Janet. I met Janet in Taiwan. She grew up, I think, just practicing folk religion in Taiwan. But in university, she came to know Jesus. But she thought kind of being a Christian came down to attending church and reading the Bible. She didn't really enjoy it, but she thought that's what you have to do. But somehow in that, God kind of birthed a desire in her to learn more and to grow. And I think this is a really cool story of how scarcity in two people's lives can overlap in God's abundance. Because I was praying because I wanted to meet some local young people, and I didn't really exactly know how to get started with that. And she was praying because she wanted someone to pray with. But we never met each other, but we'd both been praying, and she ended up posting on a Facebook group, would anyone here be willing to pray with me? And I was like, sure, I'll pray with you. So she ended up coming over, and we had a Bible study together with one of my other teammates. And at the end, she said, I never knew studying the Bible could be so beautiful. And I think that is exactly what it means to turn scarcity into abundance with God. And she actually wants to become a missionary. She wants to go to other countries where Jesus is not known very well and to reach other minorities for him. And so I am just constantly surprised at what God does when we give our scarcity to him. So that is a brief overview of what God has done in my life. If you have any other questions, I'll be outside in the foyer after service, and I would love to talk to you. But yeah, thank you for your support as I serve overseas, and thank you for being part of how God is turning scarcity into abundance overseas.
Well, good morning. We're Ron and Pam Fear, if you don't know us. In 2013, Ron and I had the privilege of serving with the Rafiki Foundation. They have children's villages in 10 countries in Africa. And we were able to go to Malawi, Africa, for 16 months. And it was really a time in which the Lord grew our faith, which you can say was from scarce to abundant, and as he provided for our every need.
It was my idea to go for this extended mission trip. had been in Kenya for a month twice before, but this definitely would be more of a stretch. It required us renting out our house, storing our belongings, and leaving our family.
Well, when Ron first told me he felt the Lord calling us to do this, my response was, "You've got to be kidding. What are you thinking?" He was asking me to give up my home, my family, my friends. And the only life I had ever known hadn't been out of Michigan for more than a month before. So I tried ignoring the idea, and when that didn't work, I agreed to take one step at a time to see if it really was the Lord's plan for us. And as the Lord provided every single thing we needed along the way in order to go, it gave me the assurance that it was His calling, and I knew it was what we needed to do and where we needed to go. So even though I didn't feel like I had the necessary skills, the only thing the Lord was really asking of me was to give Him my willingness to go.
It was it was a bit overwhelming shortly after arriving at the village. I was in charge of the finances, and and an accounting background, that was really in my wheelhouse. But I was also in charge of 65-acre village and all the buildings, keeping the lights on, everything working. I had 3 nationals that worked with me with the property and the grounds. I dealt with taking care of the generators, broken equipment, buying parts, supplies from the local market. Even though English was spoken, communication could be a challenge. Workdays were long, and workdays were long, and nothing is taken granted in Malawi. A simple errand into town might take an hour or 2 or more. One of the big challenges was finding replacement parts. No Home Depot to go to, and usually required going to 5 or more stores to find what I would needed. I quickly learned that relationships was important in Malawi. A store owner usually wanted to take the time to get to know you before he was asked what brought you into the store. The Lord was definitely teaching me about having patience. One unexpected thing that happened when we were there, a night guard failed to report to work, and I had found out that he had died unexpectedly. The full-time missionaries were out of the village, and I was asked to help with the funeral arrangements, along with attending the funeral and burial. These were definitely new experiences that kept me dependent upon the Lord, but He was always there faithfully to provide.
Well, I was put in charge of the kitchen and laundry, and this involved scheduling the women who did the cleaning and laundry, and overseeing the purchase of food every day for the cooks who made breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 150 children and adults. And granted, I have experience doing funeral ministry here at the church, for the luncheons here at the church, but this was a whole different ballgame. I would go into town looking for a specific food item and couldn't find it, and it was told, "It's finished." And we didn't know if that could mean they just were out of stock or it's just never coming back. I also worked with women at the village who served as mamas to the children. I helped them with reading, Bible study, and some needlework. But one of my biggest challenges was to teach a Bible class to 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. And believe me, teaching children is not my gift. Those 4th graders gave me a run for my money. It stretched me and required me to completely depend upon the Lord in order to keep the children engaged. I was even online with Jeannie sometimes asking for suggestions. But I have special memories of working with them and knowing that the Lord used me to show them His love. And what a blessing it was to do baking with the children, and then to see the reactions of the men and women at the village when they received scarves that were knitted and crocheted by the women here at First Church.
As we entered the home stretch of our time in Malawi, I had one of those days when nothing seemed to be going the way I wanted it to. We were on a trip into town with Pam and I were, and I told Pam that I was done. I was ready to go home. I was finished. The very next moment, a pickup truck came around the corner, stopped in front of us, and I noticed that there was a scripture verse written on the back of the truck. Galatians 6:9. Let us not become weary in doing good. For the proper time we will reap a harvest if you do not give up. God provided just the encouragement I needed to keep on going, and I never saw that pickup truck again. As I look back and reflect on what the Lord had been teaching me, or trying to teach me during our time, I realize that He wants me to depend on Him daily. The pace of life can be demanding, wherever you are. So when I'm focused on the needs to be done or my inabilities, my emotions take over, and my attitude is not of one of surrender and trust. But when I stop to listen, the Holy Spirit will gently remind me that I'm God's child and I have been called to do His work. Wherever I am, my part is to give Him what I have and take one step at a time. He will always be faithful to provide what I need to accomplish His purposes and to be blessed.
Well, going on the mission field brought out all of my insecurities, or maybe it was the reality that I got nothing. People have said to me, I could never have done what you did. Well, I could have never done what I did either without the assurance that it was God's calling. He doesn't ask all of us to go to Africa, but He does ask all of us to give what we have, our willingness to serve Him. Even though I felt completely inadequate, the Lord's abundant provision was always there in everything I endeavored to do. He faithfully provided what both those in the village and what I needed, from having the courage to administer a malaria test to how to keep those fourth graders focused. My real call was to be finished with doing things my own way and in my own strength. God is trustworthy to multiply whatever we put in His hands. And as I surrendered my willingness to Him, He enabled the children and the employees in Malawi to know that He valued, loved, and accepted them. I learned that God will always be faithful to provide, even more than we can ask or imagine. Thank you.
One of the great parts of the United Methodist Church is the branch known as UMCOR. That stands for the United Methodist Committee on Relief. It's a worldwide organization that is funded by our offerings on UMCOR Sunday, formerly known as One Great Hour of Sharing. All around the world, money is collected that day on that special offering to support the infrastructure of UMCOR, who has relief workers positioned worldwide to respond to disasters. That means when a disaster hits, all the money collected in a special offering will go directly to relief because all the overhead is paid by us. When Hurricane Katrina hit the Gulf Coast in late August of 2005, UMCOR was ready to respond. They moved disaster response workers into place. They opened response and recovery centers all over the city of New Orleans, and they committed to 5 years of disaster recovery after the response portion was done. I had the opportunity to lead mission teams to work in the lower Ninth Ward of New Orleans each year during that recovery period. You may recall the Ninth Ward. It's the area right behind the levee. When the levee gave out, much of the Ninth Ward was underwater. This picture was taken of the Ninth Ward 4 months after the hurricane. It was complete devastation. But I want to tell you about one of the later mission trips that I took. I can't recall now if it was the last or the second to last one, so we're going to say somewhere around the year 2010. We were working on the home of a woman named Miss Evra. It was one of those shotgun-style houses, long and narrow. It was a duplex, and on one of the front doors had been replaced. In the picture, it's the one on the left. The roof had been replaced. The house had been rewired, though you can see there's not an electrical box hanging off the side there. Most of the flooring and the drywall had been replaced, and if you look closely at the picture, you can see the little trailer in the back that FEMA had given her, and she was still living in it 4 or 5 years later. On our final day at the job site, the site supervisor told us that we could not leave until Miss Evra got home from work because she likes to personally thank every person who works on her house. Now, Miss Evra was a nurse at the local hospital. She'd had insurance when the hurricane came through, even flood insurance, but a dishonest contractor had taken the money and failed to complete the work. Our job that week was to make the bathroom operational, installing a door, setting the toilet, tiling the bath, and to install a kitchen floor and a couple ceiling fans. Hanging the bathroom door turned out to be the biggest challenge. Anybody ever hung a door? Yeah, it took about 5 or 50 times to get it right, to get it level. We worked diligently through the morning. With no electricity, the afternoon heat became oppressive inside the house. But we persisted. We took lots of water breaks on the front porch, and we were just about to give up when we heard Miss Evra call from the back door. I'm so glad we waited. Miss Evra was nearing retirement age, and she was full of life. We met her in the kitchen, which was the room furthest to the back of the house, and she screamed delight when she saw us. She thanked us profusely, and then she told us her story. You see, prior to the hurricane, Miss Evra had been a hoarder. She lived in only half of the duplex and hoarded things in the other half. She claims that it was so packed full of things that she could barely walk through it. And she told of taking delivery of a new refrigerator just a few days before the hurricane. It was still wrapped in plastic when the hurricane hit, when the levee broke. And as the water rushed through her house, like many people, Miss Evra climbed onto the roof of her house and watched as the wave of water washed all the things out of her house and into the street. She watched as her brand new refrigerator, still wrapped in plastic, floated out the door, swept up in that mass of garbage that went away. At this point, Ms. Evra says she had an epiphany. She realized in that moment that she didn't need all the stuff. She needed people and she needed relationships so much more. She claims that in that instant, she realized how much more God could have done with all the things she had, her house, her belongings, her time, and her talent, if she hadn't been hanging on to it all so very tightly. So she told us that at that moment, she committed to using the second half of her duplex as a place for people to live who had no home. She committed to working with the local community center and her church to offer half of her home as housing for the unhoused. And then we showed Miss Evra the work we had done on her bathroom. She opened and closed that door several times. Not sure if she was checking my work or just thrilled that it worked. But she opened and closed that door several times. She ran her fingers down the grout in the bathtub. She looked at the toilet and clapped her hands. She sat down on the toilet lid. She lifted her eyes to heaven and raised her hand and shouted, "Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Hallelujah. Hallelujah." And tears ran down her face. And tears ran down my face. It looked like nothing to me. 7 unskilled laborers taking a week in New Orleans to try to help. A door hung, a toilet set, the tile laid, all by a bunch of amateurs. And yet, by the Spirit of God, it was so much more. It was proof that Miss Evera was loved. It was evidence that she could dream a bigger dream than she'd ever dreamed before. It was validation that God had something in store for her. Where I saw nothing but ordinary, God created something extraordinary. So today we ask, what do we need to let go of? How can we more faithfully devote ourselves to God's work? Who needs to know us so that they can better know God? Where's God telling you to use your time, your talents, and your treasures? Wherever we are. Asia or Africa, New Orleans, or Plymouth, Michigan. Whoever we are one in Jesus Christ. One body and one spirit, called to the work of the kingdom and called to this table that Christ has set. One God, one bread.